Hello and welcome to the Northern Myths podcast, where we explore the myths and legends of Northern Europe from an archetypal perspective. I'm Luke DeWolf.
And I'm Dan Larrabee.
And today we're finishing our series on the Havamal. It's been a long time coming. Took us a fair while to get through it, but this is going to be really an exciting episode. And so before I dig into that, just a little bit of our usual housekeeping. If you'd like to get in touch with us, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Northern Myths. On Instagram and YouTube, we are Northern Myths Podcast. And we're both personally on Twitter at North Myth Luke and North Myth Dan. Connect with us. We love having conversations, comments, discussions, all that. And we really do appreciate if you give us a like or a follow there. Subscribe on YouTube. That's a big deal for us. It's a really big help to the show if you subscribe on YouTube or give us a rating or review on iTunes, Facebook, any of that. Share is always appreciated as well, sharing on all your social media. So we would appreciate that if you've liked the show. And we have a couple of other ways you can support the show now if you would like. We have, by popular demand, a merchandise store now. So link will be below in the podcast notes in the YouTube description. And we also have a list of recommended books and music on our website now. So we'll have a link to those there. And if you decide to go through and click through and purchase any of the books we recommend or music, a little bit goes towards us. It's through the Amazon affiliate program. So it's just a great way to support the show and get some of the material that inspires us and that we cover on the show as well here. And speaking of that, we are, of course, using the fantastic translation of the Poetic Edda by Dr. Jackson Crawford. And if you'd like to know more about this translation, he joined us on the show on episode 26. So if you haven't listened to that interview, that was a great time. We had a great conversation with him. And it's a great translation, very readable, very modern, easy to read as a modern English speaker. And that was kind of his intention. And so thank you to Dr. Jackson Crawford and Hackett Publishing for letting us use it.
Absolutely.
Is there anything else?
Trying to think. I think for housekeeping, that's about it. But I'm pretty. It's kind of a bittersweet moment, you know. We're at the finale of the Havamal, and it's been a long journey, but it's been a journey. We've covered so much about, being prepared as you go out into the world, and dealing with the unknown that's out there, and being prepared for that by not drinking for the most part. But it's okay to drink sometimes, just not to excess. No one will make fun of you though if you do go to bed early, so that you're ready for the next day. We've learned some advice for Lodfafner, and some of it's not fantastic maybe, but it's there. We've learned about the mead of poetry and the lengths that Odin will go to in order to achieve his goals of wisdom and knowledge, and some I would say like proper and intense introspection by Odin. There were some moments where he said, who can trust me now, because he lied and was cheating and stealing things.
Yeah, so if any of that sounds good to you, feel free to go back and check out those episodes, some of our favorites, starting with episode 4, 6, 9, 13, and I can't remember what the fifth one was. And I think those are the episodes. So if you want to go back and if you haven't listened to those ones, but this is going to be quite the finale. It's kind of the culmination of everything that the Havamal was leading up to. And in fact, in some ways, I find it's sort of like Odin gives advice in the first 4 or 5 parts that we've covered. The first, it's the first 3 proper sections if they're dividing it up, right? And this is the fourth?
Yes.
Yeah. So, and then we're, in those parts, we get a lot of advice from Odin, but now we're getting a little bit of how to implement some of that advice in a roundabout way.
Absolutely. That's funny. I think I came to a very similar conclusion, and we didn't talk about that, but from what you're saying, I think we've come to a pretty similar conclusion on this. So yeah, it should be good. And yeah,
We've been preparing for this for honestly weeks and months because we knew this was coming, and I don't want to downplay this at all. This is a significant moment, and this covers a significant set of ideas in Norse mythology. And honestly, it was really hard thinking about how we were going to tackle this. And it's funny. It's kind of one of those things of I didn't ever feel like I was properly prepared or ready. I always thought there was something more I could read, something more I could think about. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like we just gotta dive into it and see where our ideas take us, right?
Oh, for sure. This is one of those sections or passages where you could look at it for the rest of your life and always find something new and a new layer to it. It's probably like 4 stanzas that we're talking about where you can just dig in for the rest of your life. So we're going to do our best to get some of probably the low-hanging fruit, honestly, but here it is. And I'm sure we'll come back to it every now and then, and it's pretty awesome. So shall we
Yeah, let's do it. And the only other thing I will say about this before we start, though, is that these 4 stanzas are some of the most concretely influential to my own life personally. So if we haven't already hyped this up enough, it's like these have serious personal meaning to me, and the way it has influenced my life in the last couple of years, it's significant. It's right up there with the work of all the people we talked about, Dr. Jordan Peterson, Jocko Willink. These stanzas are like core to my own personal life philosophy. So
I actually have a picture of a representation of these stanzas with these stanzas on a picture, like hanging on my fridge. So I see it every day. Like it's that big. So
yeah. So I think we've, well, we're not trying to hype this up, but it's like, these are significant. So I think with that, let's get to it. Okay. Back to the poem. I know that I hung on a wind-battered tree 9 long nights, pierced by a spear and given to Odin, myself to myself, on that tree whose roots grow in a place no one has ever seen. No one gave me food. No one gave me drink. At the end, I peered down. I took the runes. Screaming, I took them. And then I fell. Dan, what do you think of that?
For a second, I thought you were going to say, Dan, what does that mean? I'm going to be like, that is there's a lot going on there. So this is another one of the most famous verses. I'd say it might be more famous than, Cattle Die, Kinsmen Die. It's certainly, I would say, the most dramatic. And it's the moment that Odin is probably most known for, is that hanging upon the world tree, pierced by his spear, sacrificing himself to himself in order to get the runes. And there's so much going on here, and it's a really ancient, I want to say there's an ancient power working here, because what he is doing has been done for, like, since the beginning of time, since humans have had memory, since they were living in tribes, in caves. He's going through what we term now as a shamanic initiation. And shamanism, it's the oldest form of I guess, spiritual interaction that humans have. It is practiced throughout the world. It doesn't matter where you go. There is a shaman, or at least a figure in the society that carries out the same jobs and responsibilities that a shaman would do. So the term shaman itself, it comes from like Siberia, because Siberian shamans they're not one of the most well-known, but they're one of the most well-researched. Them, and I would say probably like South American shamans, there's a lot of research that's been done on them. And the idea of shamanism, it's this idea of being able to see in the dark. And that's one of the definitions for the word shaman, is one who sees in the dark. And I mean, archetypally, that's just like the one who is able to see into the unknown, and to kind of be a light in the unknown, to make that place that is known, so that other people within the tribe who may not have the same aptitude for this kind of work, so that they're still able to partake in sort of the spiritual aspects of life. And so I think, I mean, if you've been listening to us, you've probably figured this out by now, but I'm definitely coming from an understanding that, you know, there is a spiritual side to life, or at least I wouldn't say I'm not a materialist. There's more to life than just the solid. So as I'm talking about this, that's definitely gonna be my bias. I'm not going to be defending it every time, like, oh, they believe this. I'm just going to talk about it as they would. So I guess I'll give an explanation of shamanism, because without it, you're not going to be able to understand just the importance of what Odin is doing here. So as I said, it's sort of the oldest form of spirituality, specifically in a tribe, and the way that a shaman was selected would be through usually some sort of trauma, and it'd be their initiation experience into shamanism, and that can be anything from having a terrible disease when they're a child, but and being on death's door, but miraculously healing. It could be a lot of people's believe that getting hit by lightning is a sign that you're a shaman. And in fact, there are many reports of children running into the fields during thunderstorms because they want to get hit by lightning to be a shaman. Like, it's a prestigious position to hold in the community, but it isn't, and it isn't like a full-time job either. Like, the shaman would also be like, you know, a hunter, or he would have like a day job, and then, but for religious ceremonies, he would be the one leading it. And the power of the shaman comes from the spirit world. And the idea is that if they've had that near-death experience, they've sort of gone to the border of the spirit world, and the spirits are the ones who sort of push them back and kind of like touch them, you know, spiritually touch them to push them back into life. And now they have that connection with the spirit world, and they can interact with the spirit world without too much trouble. And in shamanic belief, and it's odd because this is actually found throughout the world too. Like, most of these beliefs, they might differ a little bit in the details throughout the world, but for the most part, they're pretty standard, which is weird. Like, I don't know how to explain that. But in general, in the spirit world, there's 3 levels. There's the upper world, the lower world, and the middle world. The upper world is where, beings like gods or angels would exist, ancestors as well. The middle world is the world that we occupy right now in reality. And the lower world, it's not actually an underworld. It's like a pristine, natural world. It would be like, if you go out into a remote area where there's no people and hasn't been touched by like technology or humanity for 100 years, that would be a good representation of the lower world. And the idea is you can travel by doing a shamanic journey to these different worlds. One of the representations of these different worlds is a pillar or a tree or a mountain. And you find these symbols throughout the world. And so we have Odin hanging from, well, the wind-battered tree is understood to be Yggdrasil. And if you look, you've got Midgard, you've got Asgard, and then, well, you've got the roots. I don't know if it's got a...
Yeah, it's the various underworld worlds. Like,
exactly.
I think it's Niflheim and a combination. It's sort of all, yeah, we've got that 3-tiered system in the mythology, but then it's expanded out to 9.
To 9.
It's confusing, but for simplification, we should, I think, keep it to, Asgard, Midgard, and the underworlds, right?
The underworlds, exactly, yeah.
So if you're, we can be more specific, but for this discussion, keep it simple. Yeah,
absolutely. And this is actually a good place to mention this, that the Norse Germanic beliefs, they actually aren't shamanic beliefs. They're more sophisticated, and I don't want that to be a value judgment. They're just more complicated. They've evolved. Shamanism was literally they'd be in the nomadic tribes or the hunting tribes. And once they settled down, well, then these other ideas started cropping up, because now, you wanted your gods to sort of be nearby. You didn't want them to, you could have them nearby. You could have like regular spirits that were around you, right? So this is what it is. What this actually is it's a remnant of the shamanistic beliefs. So that's why it's so old and ancient. This particular part, it's going basically back to the beginning. And I think there's something about that where Odin has to do something that is ancient to get that power. He's doing away with any of the pomp and pageantry that might have been there, and doing like what the first people did in order to access that power. That, yeah, I think I'll stop with that for a bit, just to give like an introduction to the shamanistic elements, and then as we read the next two, I'll get more into it.
Oh, sounds good to me. Because honestly, these two stanzas. First of all, the shamanic level, that's something I haven't explored nearly as much. And so your introduction is great. And if you want another take on this, our interview with Tuomas Ronakari, who is sort of, well, he goes by Shaman Violin in his musical projects, and so that should tell you something. But also he has gone and studied these cultures and their music and all that. And yeah, he's a great person to look at, and our interview with him was fantastic. And so if you want to know more about shamanism, that's one place to go. But no, so here we get that initiation here, and he performs this sacrifice, this intentional sacrifice, in order to grow from it in some way. And I think when you were talking about, kids going to lightning storms in order to get this power sort of thing, like, first of all, that shows how prestigious this was, because not everyone can do this, right? And quite naturally that would result in a sort of a place of prestige for the shaman, because they're doing something that not everyone can do and requires such an initiation to go through. And for me, it's like, either they're going to die or they're going to survive and have this new power that provides something for the tribe, right? And that's the important thing, right? This is for the benefit of the entire society, And the thing is, there's that cost, right? If they die, if the person undergoing the initiation, if they die, well, that's it. You've lost a human life who could have been of value to the society in some other way. You lose their entire potential. You lose everything that they could have done, could have been. And then, you don't get the shaman, right? So all of that together shows just the massive stakes of doing this. But what I want to bring up and focus on here a little bit is just that idea of sacrifice, because this is something so central to, I think, first of all, just my own personal idea of how to live in the world, but also I think the example that Odin really is, because we've certainly seen his wisdom at work. We've certainly seen the ideas that he presents, and some of the stories that the adventures that he's gone on that may or may not have exactly gone right, or at least they show that Odin is not the greatest character at the end of the day. But the whole thing here is that how he gets there. We've been looking at what Odin suggests, and we've been looking at some of his actions, but how he gets there. And the how is really what I think we can translate into the example that if you really want to follow this path, where it can end up. And so that brings me to the concept of sacrifice. First of all, Odin is doing this voluntarily. I get that from the fact that he's saying he's given to Odin, myself to myself. He's not. I mean, you could read it that he's being forced to be there, but I don't think that's valid. He is willingly getting into a situation where he is suffering, he's undergoing an ordeal, but he's giving himself to himself. This is anything that you do to better yourself. This is anything that you do that maybe you would rather do something else, but you know that if you go through with the sacrifice, that you will come out better for it. This is working out, dieting, for physical benefits, to be more physically healthy, to lose weight, anything like that. This is discipline. This is the discipline to follow a regimen that is constantly getting bombarded with temptations to break with that. Instead of working out, I could sleep in, or instead of eating the diet that I'm trying to eat in order to lose some weight or to better my overall health, I can go order a pizza, something like that. It's the discipline to stay on that and to make that sacrifice. It's studying in school. It's doing things to keep up your mind in order to exercise that part. It's not just a physical thing. It's all of these things to get any sort of a benefit out of life. And the whole thing is here, at the end, Odin gets a real reward here. And we'll talk a lot more about the runes here a little bit later, but it says here, so at the end, I peered down, I took the runes. And so even just as a conception here, if you know nothing about the runes at all, even just as a conception here, you can think of them as sort of a primal reward for having undergone this sacrifice, and almost the ultimate reward for having gone through and done the work in order to achieve something. And we'll certainly get into more about what exactly they are. And I mean, just on a very high level, they are an alphabet, they're a writing system sort of thing. And we'll get into why that's special. But that might seem mundane now, with literacy rates near 100% in most developed countries and all that. But, they weren't always that way. And Odin wins this at the end of this ordeal. And Yeah, it's just, it talks about the importance of that sacrifice, and facing it voluntarily is important. I don't think I got through everything on that. So facing challenges voluntarily is necessarily distinct from being forced into a situation. In something like that, you're kind of in fight or flight mode, just attempting to survive. There's lots of potential to get permanently scarred by going into a negative situation. Well, even going through voluntarily though, there is the possibility, like the prevalence of PTSD in soldiers and all that. They certainly know what they're getting into. That's for sure. I mean, I'm sure there's a certain proportion that is maybe a little naive of what being in the army actually is, or something like that. But I would say for the most part, they know what they're getting into, especially if they're being deployed to a combat zone sort of thing. And then, the ability to just face danger head on, go out into the unknown and confront it. It at least ups your chances though. And yeah, so by facing it voluntarily, Odin knows what he's in for. He knows he's in for a hard time, but he also knows that there is some reward at the end. There's some value in doing that. And by focusing on that, by focusing on the potential at the end, he's able to get through it. He doesn't break his discipline. He doesn't eat or drink. This doesn't have to be literal, but he doesn't break, and he gets the reward.
Just building on that for a second, when he talks about being pierced by a spear, it's understood that it's his own spear. So he's absolutely doing this willingly. And something that I just thought of with the no one gave me food, no one gave me drink, and the hanging part. With shamanic journeying, there's a few ways to journey, and shamanic journeying isn't magical. There's actual biological things going on that you can measure in like an MRI or whatever. So I'll give a small explanation of that. So with journeying, basically what you're doing is you're changing your brain waves. So right now, Luke and I have beta brainwaves. We're awake, we're conscious, we're looking around, we're thinking, we're active, so the brainwaves are going pretty quick. Then there's alpha waves, which if you're listening, you might actually have those. If you're just sort of sitting there listening and thinking and being contemplative about it, you might have alpha brainwaves right now. When you're meditating or sleeping, you start getting theta brainwaves, and they go slower. And then there's delta brainwaves, which is like deep sleep. Like you're not even dreaming at that point. You're just like out. And then there's gamma brainwaves that's like Dalai Lama meditating for 4 hours type of thing. And they've measured this. None of this is like pseudoscience quackery or anything. This is just like they've hooked someone's brain up to something that measures like hertz, and they figured this out. So in shamanic journeying, they induce theta brainwaves to so you get to this weird like spot that's kind of like between dreaming and wakefulness. You're still like conscious, but you're dreaming, and you can see things going on. I know like Jung he did some shamanic practices, and generally what you do is you play like a percussion instrument, like a rattle or a drum, and it's like 4 beats a second. And if you do that for 10 minutes, you'll invoke or evoke theta brainwaves. And getting more into the possibilities of them and the not so well documented science, it's said that this you can get more creativity through theta brainwaves and that kind of thing. But like drumming and percussive instruments aren't the only way. You can do it through drugs. You can do it through meditation just without anything else. You can also do it through like extreme physical experiences, such as fasting, hanging for 9 days. 9 is also an important number to remember because the symbol is that it's a complete number. I'm not exactly sure why. There isn't a lot of information on why it's a complete number, but just that it is. And if you can think of other things that 9 figures prominently into, like childbirth and that kind of thing. But the idea is that Odin did this extreme initiation rite in order to get this this incredible prize of the runes. And so there is actual like biological scientific support to back up what he's done here, and that it would do something kind of crazy to him. The other thing is that you can actually slip into like gamma brainwaves as well through a shamanic journey. I don't think it happens all that often, but when you do, this part isn't. I guess scientists don't know exactly what gamma brainwaves do, and it's hard to scientifically measure it because you're asking someone like, well, how do you feel? But the feeling that's most associated with gamma brainwaves is like deep insight and a feeling of like oneness with the universe. So like if you were to go on YouTube or something and watch someone talk about like a DMT trip or ayahuasca, and they would, or psilocybin mushrooms. I think Jordan Peterson actually has a good blurb on magic mushrooms in one of his biblical talks. That they take it and then they have this. They consider it one of the most life-changing, important moments in their life, and they feel this incredible oneness with everyone in the universe, and they become more open to new ideas by a few counts. Like I can't think of the right term, but it's not like a marginal amount. It's like
a standard deviation.
Standard deviation, yeah. So like a standard deviation or two. Like it's apparently impactful. I've never ingested mushrooms or DMT or ayahuasca, but like that's a significant result. So there is something going on here that we don't understand at all, but there is we are biologically capable of these types of experiences that to me is like mind blowing, because you think of this, okay, it's a god and it's a myth, but it's kind of possible. I'm not recommending you don't eat or drink for 9 days, but you might be able to do something to change your perspective, that you might not necessarily get something as important as the runes and like language, but you might have a different perspective.
Right. And I was going to say, the way that I translate into something that I can personally do, because first of all, I don't think I am shamanically inclined. And I think that's a thing. Like, I think some people are not able to get into that state all that easily. I've never been all that great at meditation. I can't turn my brain off like that or put it into a state like that. But the way this works for someone like me, or I think you can extend this in general, is that what Odin is doing is he is doing what is necessary to get some reward. He's going through hardship. He's going through intentional sacrifice in order to improve himself. And by doing it shamanically, I mean, that's sort of in its own category. And of course, the reward is different. But the whole thing here, well, not so much different. Every reward is a good reward. And I do believe that actually too. Like, the smallest sacrifices are enough to better your life. You know what I mean? Like, just by, for me, I know just by starting to work out a couple of times a week, I started to get stronger and more fit and more healthy, and, changing my diet just a little bit. Like, the small things work, the small things get you started, and every sacrifice and journey and ordeal does not have to be hanging on a tree for 9 days in order to achieve some massive, monstrous goal, but it's how to achieve anything worthwhile, I think. Like, not everything is going to be winnable or takeable for nothing. Some things maybe a little bit, but there's virtually nothing is free in this world, and money is not free in this world. It's, well, even working in a job that maybe isn't your life passion, something like that could be under this category here, because of course you might want to just go play video games or play sports or whatever it is you like, right? Whatever your passion is, maybe you want to paint all day, something like that. But if it doesn't make you money, sometimes you got to go out and make some money. And it's not always the most enjoyable thing. A lot of people don't like their jobs. I would say, like, many people, if not most, probably don't like their jobs in some small way, right? But by doing that, by making that sacrifice, well, you get a reward, which for the most part is the form of currency that you can trade for goods and services, et cetera, et cetera. But this sort of journey, it's symbolic of all of those things that you do to improve your life. And it's how to achieve the things you want to achieve on a meta level. It's on a symbolic level. That's what it does. And maybe I'll touch on the only other thing I had for this was that the roots of the world tree are in chaos. And you mentioned that before, Dan, a little bit, but it's exactly right. This whole thing, the roots growing in a place no one has ever seen. That's exactly right. No one knows the origin of the world. Not really. We haven't been there. No one has seen it. Not even Odin saw the origin of the world, and he killed the only ones who were kind of there at that time, right? And no one goes into chaos, into pure chaos, and survives. I think we can make a general archetypal rule about that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think there is anything about facing pure chaos, pure undifferentiated chaos, and surviving that. We've made the distinction between having your eye in the unknown and having your eye in, like, the void. And there's plenty of mythological examples of looking into the void and being turned to stone. I think the Medusa story is a good one for that. Like, Medusa being a symbol of the great mother. And then if you stare into her eyes, like, you go crazy, you turn to stone, right? Getting frozen by the unknown. And in that, hanging on the world tree, you're putting yourself into Odin is putting himself, but you, by extension, could put yourself into a connection with that pure, undifferentiated chaos, the potential for everything. That's why this makes sense. That's why this works. It's because you put yourself out there for that sacrifice, and you put yourself out there into the unknown, and you do something. You put yourself through something, and the potential is there to win the runes, to win the highest reward, or win just what you're aiming for. Win something. And you have to do this. You have to make those sacrifices. That's what I get from these two stanzas.
Absolutely. Should we move on to the next two?
Well, considering we've talked for about half an hour on just these stanzas, I think so. Quite something, huh?
Because I've got more for, like, the next two. So yeah, let's go.
Let's do it. Back to the poem. Stanzas 140 to 141. I learned 9 spells from the famous son of Bolthorn, the father of Bestla, and I won a drink of that precious mead poured from Othrurir. My imagination expanded. I became wise. I grew, and I thrived. One word chased another word flowing from my mouth. One deed chased another deed flowing from my hands.
So we have the rewards of going through this initiation in this harrowing experience of hanging on the tree and being pierced and, sacrificing himself to the ideal of himself. And I think it's important because we were just talking about how he is exposing himself to chaos and sort of the most amount of chaos he could get, right? And the reward for it are runes and spells, and being able to, one word is chasing the other word out of his mouth, so he's able to speak and he's able to do. And what I get from this is that he suffered under chaos for long enough that it was no longer chaos. He was able to create or find the tools that he needed to create order, because that is what the runes are. That's what the alphabet, that's what language is. Like, bare minimum, they are tools to create order out of chaos. I mean, if you think about it, like language itself, it's just sound symbols that mean something to other people who know what those sound symbols mean, and you're able to communicate ideas and order thoughts, communicate ideas, and then work together to order what's around you. Like, it's really weird if you think about talking as you pushing air into someone else's ear that contains information, right? Like, you don't want to think about it too much, right? But it's so important because that's how it's the very basis for building a community that is then better able to create order out of chaos and survive against the unrelenting chaos at the borders. And we see this in other myths as well. Like Marduk, one of his powers was he was a spellcaster. He'd say magic words because it's the exact same thing. He having that ability to be able to create that order out of chaos just through communication. We talked a little bit about it in actually not a little bit, quite a bit about it in the last Havamal episode, number 3, yeah, Runo 3, where this idea of magic being something that orders things, and words and spells really being something that is, you're just ordering the world, but that is magic because, like I said, you're pushing air into someone else's ear, and it's giving them ideas, it's making them feel things, and it's spreading information. That, like, if that's not magic, like, what is? Like, yeah. And we're seeing here, like, the very beginning of getting that ability to communicate and to start making order in the midst of chaos. So we really can't oversell this enough that, like, this is the most important reward for society to spring up, because for a society to grow, you need more than one person. And the only way to do that is through communication and a shared language, at least some understanding of what the other person is thinking. And that's what Odin, through his sacrifice, reached down and grabbed. And it's interesting too, because the word rune just means secret. And it's fascinating because where did communication come from? How would they have figured out how to say the first words, right? Like, if I'm saying a word to someone and they've never heard it, like there's no understanding until you have context. Well, how did they first get that context? Like it's fascinating. We could probably talk about like the origin of language forever. It'd probably be pretty interesting actually, but it's just that it's super important. And the end of stanza 141, where he says, "One word chased another word flowing from my mouth. One deed chased another deed flowing from my hands." Like that's exactly right. That's exactly right, because they were able to formulate the ideas and then actually implement them in the world.
Yeah, and I was gonna talk more about the runes specifically in the next group of stanzas, but I might as well here. So I didn't even go with just the basic communication of language either. So first of all, I think that's a great point. I wasn't even going there on this actually, and the origin of language is quite something. It's it really is what differentiates us from most of the other animal kingdom. There's some really, really tangential evidence, not tangential, like kind of tenuous, I suppose, that say dolphins are able to communicate somehow. But the funny thing about dolphins is that they cannot influence the world around them. They do not have hands like we do with thumbs and that can actually manipulate the world in a fine way. And so they can't do anything with whatever their communication might be. Maybe they can coordinate to go get some fish, or they can talk to each other about how these strange land animals are kind of interesting and sometimes they want to go have some fun with them or something like that. But they cannot order the world around them physically the way we can. And that's an important point, and maybe we'll circle back to that. But I have just a little anecdotal story about the significance of written language, because I think we certainly take for granted spoken language, and that really is something that anyone can pick up, like naturally on a base level. Like babies are able to hear and reproduce every sound that humanity is able to produce, but then they eventually start to get limited to the ones that they are exposed to, that their parents' language or their society's language is, and then they start speaking that language after not a very long time. They start reproducing it, they mimic it, they can produce it. It's something that every human effectively is able to do, with of course the exceptions for mental or physical disability that would prevent that, but that is certainly the exception. But written language is different. Written language is, well, first of all, the origin of written language is, for the most part, it seems like it only happened in one place in the what do you call it, the old world. And possibly, I really should have gotten more specifics on this, to be honest. I only just thought to bring this up now, full disclosure. But and then it would have originated in one place in the New World as well, in North America, South America, all that. But it sort of spread out from there. And I'm sure there's better people to talk about the writing system that the runes are, kind of on a basic level, and the origins of that. My understanding is that it is related to Phoenician in some way, or possibly the old Italic script, which became Latin, that they are related and there would have been cultural contact. And that is the relation, and that is why there are some similarities. And that's not to take the magic out of them or anything like that. I don't mean the magic as in like the possible symbolic magical implications, which I will talk about later, but the wonder and the spirit of Odin winning these runes. That's not to take anything away from that, but that's just saying there is like kind of a historical record of how that developed. But written language gives the ability for one person to transmit information to another person without telling them. And so the story that I've got, and this is from a good friend of mine, Kyle, he told, and this is sort of a double hearsay something or other. He was telling me a story of a movie that I haven't seen, but it was about, from my recollection, it was about the contact of Europeans in North America with Native Americans who didn't have a writing system at that period of time. And they were kind of explaining how it works. And the way this European settler explained it was he told this Native American, apparently they had established some verbal communication, but he told him to tell him something, just tell him something. And so the Native American says something, a word or a phrase or what have you, and the European writes it down. Then he passes the note to his friend, his companion, who can also read and write, and his companion reads what is on the note there, and then tells it to the Native American, and that just blows his mind, because he transmitted that information without saying it. He transmitted that information to another person without having to explicitly say it. It's just revolutionary how influential that is. Information can now be stored and put away somewhere to access it when you need it. It doesn't have to be transmitted through this oral tradition of literally memorization. That's how these poetic traditions that we've covered really would have developed, is because poetry is a way of remembering. Poetry has structures in place that limit the word choice that you can make, or limit the sentence structure, so that it's easier to remember, and it forms a rhythmic pattern, usually, whether it's in the number of syllables or rhyming or something like that. That's why these developed in the first place. But now you don't need that. And that's sort of bittersweet too, in the sense that a lot of societies kind of lost these oral traditions if they got forgotten and all that. But no, it's a big deal. The introduction of language is a huge deal.
Yeah, it's exactly the type of reward you would expect for undergoing such a huge sacrifice, because the reward is that important and powerful.
Definitely. And the rest of these two stanzas. So first of all, I suppose we'd better address the genealogical elements here. So the Bolthorn, meaning evil thorn, was a frost giant, and he was the father of Bestla, who is Odin's mother. So the implication here of learning spells from the son of Bolthorn would be that it's an uncle of Odin. And there's some speculation. The son is technically unknown here, but there's speculation it could be Mimir, which would make sense in this case, sort of being a god of wisdom and all that in a vague sense. We talk about Mimir some other times, but the idea that I get from that, though, is that Odin is learning from the wise, which we certainly see elsewhere in the Havamal earlier on, is that the idea of being quiet and learning from those around you is just so important. And I think that's what's happening here. And, the funny thing about this section is that coming right after the dramatic hanging on the tree, I don't think this is a direct reward of hanging from the tree. But having done that, Odin now has some understanding of how he can get more knowledge. The implication here is that he falls and then returns, which is tantamount to essentially falling down into the underworld and then coming back renewed, rejuvenated. That's another big shamanic concept there, first of all. And I didn't want to address it until now, like sort of he's gone down and come back up. But after that, now he has the ability to go seek out knowledge and learn. And he's doing that. He's learning from the wise, and he's pursuing things that inspire. The meat of poetry as a symbol is really cool because, on one level, it's sort of like saying that all alcohol has the capacity and potential to lead to inspiration, which I think is pretty accurate because, maybe it dulls your senses somewhat and whatever, but it certainly leads to free flowing of information and free thinking, right?
Absolutely. It lowers the inhibitions, right, for good or for ill. But yeah, and so you're able to be inspired and then actually maybe do something about it.
Exactly. And the funny thing that makes me think of that inspire should sort of have a positive and a negative side to it as well, just like everything, right? How chaos has a positive and negative side, how order has a positive and negative side. Lots of dichotomies. But inspiration, I think too, it's like if you're inspired to do something that might be ill-advised, that's not necessarily a great thing. So all the inspiration in the world is not necessarily going to be good, be positive. But then Odin's imagination expanded. So he gets the meat of poetry. His imagination expands. He is able to think creatively. I liked your point about how he goes into chaos and is now able to order it. But I think there's another nuance there. He understands the way he can go into chaos bit by bit, go into the unknown bit by bit. And creativity it's interesting. Creativity, it's not the same thing as, I don't think it's the same thing as heroically going and conquering a part of the unknown, but it's a way of taking what is known and innovating it. It's a way of creating something that did not exist before, which very almost by definition requires that you understand something unknown, understand something that was previously not fully known anyway, and you make something from it. He's got imagination, and he's got the ability to string ideas together and to string actions together. The whole thing is big. It like, it's almost like there's a switch, and now he's able to go do these things.
Well, it's the result of the initiation, the death. Because maybe we talk a little bit about what an initiation is. It's a death and rebirth. You go through an initiation to become something new. And often, at least in the past, initiations were pretty traumatic because they actually wanted to sort of scare you to death or have you experience something so terrible that you had to change in order to get through it. And this can be anything from, like we've got here with Odin hanging on a tree, like shamanic initiations that would sometimes be a lot of times be some sort of a deprivation, like I think the Navajo have their they go for a walk, or there's the walkabout in Australia, that kind of thing. And then there's the tribes in the Amazon who make gloves of those bullet ants, and you have to wear them, and then you go crazy because of pain and all that. Or even just taking ayahuasca, like that's like from what I understand, you drink ayahuasca, you throw up a few times, which is, terrible right from the beginning. But then you're like on this crazy trip for like 8 hours and you're not in control. You're just sort of there letting the drug do its thing. So and then you come out a different person who you were before dies, and then you are reborn. So that's where initiation is. So that when we're talking about this, like, it is very clearly like an initiatory experience that he's gone through, because he's so much, like you were saying, his imagination has expanded. He became wise. He grew and thrived. Like he's not the same Odin that went up on a tree at the beginning.
No, and the whole thing with that is that it doesn't have to be that dramatic, but on a symbolic level, it really does apply universally, because you're not the same person after an encounter like that, no matter how small. Like, just the act of doing something, it's going to change you,
Absolutely.
The other point I had about all this was that Odin starts to grow and thrive. And then he says, one word chased another word, one deed chased another deed. This, I think, references the idea that success breeds more success. This is the Matthew principle, which we have talked about before, which is, it's named after a verse in the biblical book of Matthew, which goes, I'm paraphrasing, something like, for those who have everything, more will be given. For those who have nothing, everything will be taken. Something like that. And it's also describing a little more scientifically or modern is the Pareto principle, which is the idea that governs that, many natural phenomena actually, that the most successful will have the most resources, or the most work will be done by an order of magnitude less number of people. Like for a company who has for any company, the square root of the number of employees does half the work, something like that. So in a company of 9, 3 people does half the work. In a company of 16, 4 people do half the work. And expand that to bigger numbers, which I can't do the math on in my head. But so that is that principle, though. And the idea about that here that I'm seeing is sort of like Odin got started. He got inspired, he starts to grow and thrive. And the idea is you have to start. You have to get off of zero. It's incredibly hard if you have no resources or no wealth to start building wealth. And that's one of society's biggest issues, really, is to figure out how to get people who are kind of stuck with no assets, no wealth, to start building that in order to get them out of poverty, everything like that. But the point here is that you have to start. In order to start succeeding at anything, you have to start making baby steps. It's pursuing what you can. It's those small victories. It really is starting with whatever you can control. It's cleaning your room or making your bed every day, something like that, which it's small things, but it's ordering the world that you have control of and starting to make small victories, and it'll continue, it'll grow, and you keep at it, you keep making these sacrifices, and it works. Like, the implication here to me is that Odin now starts to make continual sacrifices. He starts to do the work consistently in order to survive and thrive and grow and become all that he can be, to fulfill the utmost potential. And actually, when you said he's sacrificing himself to his ideal self, that got me thinking that, well, first of all, that was fantastic, because what you are doing is you have a vision of yourself that is better than the one you have now. But maybe you don't know how to get there. But what you can do is you can try and start working on it and start making those sacrifices. And you're sacrificing yourself to your ideal self because you want to get there one day. You want to get from the unbearable self of the present to the ideal self of the future. And this is how to get there. This is going out into the unknown voluntarily and facing what you have to face, going through the struggles you have to face. And you have to start, and then it'll get easier.
The other thing I want to mention is that I think we actually talked about this like before we got into it, but as I was reading through this and then going back to the Havamal and reading it, I feel like, one, that the Havamal was compiled like this for a reason, because we've talked a lot about sort of the common sense things that Havamal says to do. Look around the corner when you go outside. Don't drink so much that you're acting stupid. Don't make fun of people behind their back or whatever. I get the impression that would have been put at the beginning, because if you want to get to the point where you're going to be doing heroic things, and we're actually going to be getting to stuff where like Odin is able to do superhuman things. If you want to get there and even be worthy of attempting a sacrifice of this magnitude, you kind of have to be able to do the other stuff first, or at least have made enough progress on that to get to this point. And so for me, this is kind of the climax of the Havamal and the, it's not a traditional story that they're telling, but I do think there is kind of a story here of, if you do these things, you're going to get to a point where now you can do like tremendous things. And I think that's what your point is that like he's made these sacrifices and he's going to keep getting better because he's done all this other stuff before.
Definitely. It's a roadmap for how you can live your life and organize your life in a way that gives you the best chance of succeeding, and a way to work on improving yourself in a concrete way. It doesn't say exactly what to do in every situation, but the blueprint is there. You have to figure out what you need to do in order to become your ideal self, and then do it, work at it, have discipline. And that's hard. It's hard to live like this. It really is hard to live in the example of Odin, especially that is outlined here. It's really, really hard, but it's worth it.
I was just thinking, there's that thing called My Year of Living Biblically or whatever. We could do My Year of Living Odinically, yeah. See what happened there. I don't even know. That might be too much. We'll actually get to a stanza that might warn us against that, but
definitely. And I feel like we've hit a good point to move on.
Let's do it.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, it's not bad.
We'll see if we revisit that at some point.
Maybe make a reality show. Yeah, do it up right.
Do it right. Definitely. Okay, this will be stanzas 142 to 144. Back to the poem. You will find runes, runic letters to read. Very great runes, very powerful runes, which Odin painted, and which the holy gods made, and which Odin carved. Odin carved for the gods, and Dain for the elves, Dvalin for the dwarves, and Osvith for the giants. I carved some myself. Do you know how to write them? Do you know how to read them? Do you know how to paint them? Do you know how to test them? Do you know how to ask them? Do you know how to bless them? Do you know how to send them? Do you know how to offer them?
So this is pretty cool because now we're getting into the runes and talking about Odin painting them and carving them. There's a few things I'll start with the names. So Odin carved for the gods and Dain for the elves. And Dain, it roughly translates as like dead. And I thought that was interesting. There is some thought about elves being ancestors and like honored ancestors kind of thing, because elves are sort of seen as I guess there's light elves. There's also dark elves, but you didn't really hear too much about that. But they're important land spirits, and Freyr's their king. And I think it's interesting. I'm not exactly sure what to make of it, but I think there's something interesting that the dead have carved runes. Death has carved runes for the elves who might be the ancestors. I think it says that it's collecting the the wisdom of past generations, so that it can actually be passed on in written form, in like a concrete object rather than just through word of mouth. And I think it's probably less. You don't lose as much if you've written it down. You also might not. There's probably a trade-off. Like you might not be getting something that an oral tradition would have, which I'm not sure what it is off the top of my head, but there's probably a trade-off there. But at least with writing it down, like you're saying, you've got this physical thing that can survive long after people have died. And so I think that's one of the things that they're getting at here, is that because the runes are now available, knowledge can be passed on in a way that's more solid and durable, I guess. With Dvalin, it translates as sleeping one, and carved for the dwarves, which are another sort of land spirit. They may also be ancestors. There's a lot of debate about what these creatures are, but I think again, it's showing that you're able now to get all of this information and sort of share it with future generations. It's not just in tribe now; it's throughout groups and in between groups, because we see Asfith for the giants, which the name translates something like Godwood or God Forest, but it's giants, right? So it's sort of the natural enemy of the gods. But they too are carving runes, so that it seems to be like they're now able to communicate with each other through this written form, which I think is that's one of the quickest ways to have an explosion of knowledge, is to share, to share between tribes. That's huge. Again, like you're going to be developing much quicker. And then especially if they're like your enemy and they're going to be looking at things from a much different perspective than you are. Now you can see it. Now you can actually work with things and, do something with that information. Maybe they know something that you don't know. Maybe they do something in a way that's slightly different, but better, or even worse. Like there's just a lot more that you can learn from that. So, and then we've got, I think it's one of the coolest stanzas, because it's kind of for dramatic. It's like, do you know how to do all these things with the runes to make them? And I think the saying, like, you need to be proficient in this in order to use them properly and to get these benefits from it, you have to know how to do all this.
Yeah, and first the point about the different tribes, the elves, dwarves, giants, I read that as a little bit of sort of like saying that the best figures of these different tribes have all kind of developed this, which to me points towards that the runes are kind of a culmination that all advanced tribes and societies are kind of eventually going to get to. It's sort of like the culmination of the search for knowledge in general. Like eventually you're going to have to start writing things down and organizing it, sort of thing. Like it does seem like a natural progression. And certainly, like you said, for all the oral traditions and that, I'm sure they have some innovations that are harder to do when you organize your society and your language based on written communication as opposed to based on oral communication. I mean, books and all that, they have rich mythologies within them, Tolkien being one of them. Of course, he was inspired by other mythologies, especially the Norse, the Finnic, the Celtic, but he created his own mythology and sort of wrote that down from his own imagination. The thing is, I don't know if mythology would have necessarily developed in the way that it did without oral communication, without that organic development and refinement of stories of heroes and archetypes that may have been real people at one point the original stories might have been real deeds by real people, but they got refined over time because memory only lasts about 2 generations for specifics. And then they sort of start to amalgamate into heroic figures, and that's how we get gods and myths proper, is that over time sort of thing. So I do think that the oral tradition and the organic development was important. We would not be the same sort of people if we did not have that developmental time. And there's a little bit about almost the concept of alchemy, which desired to create gold out of other metals. And what they wanted to do was speed up the natural process of the development of these metals by their mind, that they just needed more time, and then they would eventually become gold or diamonds or whatever. But the diamonds is actually a good, the proper example of this, though, is that after a certain amount of time, a little piece of carbon is going to turn into a diamond, right? And that's sort of the thing, is that I think over the time and over the development, eventually it gets to the point where you need to start writing things down and take that next step. And seeing these different tribes having because I do see it sort of as that, like your point about the elves and the dwarves possibly being symbolically ancestors or whatnot, that's also important. But the giants, it's pretty clear they're a different tribe. They're at least the unknown, right? And so the idea that the unknown, those in the unknown are also doing the same thing, I think it points to the benefits of learning things this way. I probably forgot about like the Chinese writing systems. I think those developed on their own separately from the Phoenicians and that. I don't remember. Anyway, but the whole point about this is that the writing system, I think, is something like the culmination of the search for knowledge and the next step to begin organizing the world even more and even better. And all the do you know stanzas here, the stanza about do you know, well, I think it shows something like you need to know more than just the shapes, right? You need to be not just read and write them. It's that you need to test them, ask them, bless them, send them, offer them. There's something more to that, right? And I think this stanza is sort of pointed to as evidence that these are more than just an alphabet. And that's sort of true in a literal sense, because you can't do anything with an alphabet on its own. You have to be able to organize them somehow. You have to shape them into words, then shape them into sentences, shape them into full ideas, and then they turn into something. It's not just the symbols by themselves.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. Absolutely. Yeah, it's not just the symbols themselves. You have to know how to use them. Otherwise they're worthless. Absolutely.
And of course, in the modern era, we do have some schools of thought that the runes were also magical and used for divination. And I'm sure that's possible. I'm sure there's other people who know more about the history of the runes and that, whether they were used historically for that purpose. And it's possible divination was something that went on back then. Certainly today in modern neo-pagan revivals, and that the runes are used magically and for divination. And I think we've talked a little bit about that before, how, that's legitimate. It's like if it's a way of focusing yourself or trying to divine other knowledge there. I don't do it myself, but that's not really a knock on it. It's just one way that to view these symbols that way. But at a minimum, I do think that this stanza shows that the understanding that there is more to it. And so any magical, more magical, directly magical uses of the runes, I'm not going to comment on right now because I don't really know enough about that. Certainly I haven't ever experienced it that way, but that it is something that people do. And I think this stanza is used as evidence that there is more to the runes than just as a communication device as well.
Absolutely. And I've mentioned it a bit here, but language itself and and the runes being language, written language, there is sort of understanding of magic there in terms of it lasting longer than even when people are alive. Like I told the story of Alan Moore, the comic book writer, who's got that great video that's, if you watch or listen to Rune 3 of our Havamal episodes, like, I go into a long thing about it, but basically the magical power of language is that you can give people ideas and emotions through it, and having it written down, it can last longer than you being alive, or maybe the person you're directing your magical spell at is alive. So the example I give in the other episode is that, if you've got bardic magic, so which would be very similar to this, so poetic magic, you could write a poem about someone making fun of them, and so everyone laughs at them, and that's great. But if you're really good, you could bring like shame on them and their family, and that's impressive. But if you're like fantastic, you could bring shame on them and their family, and then they could collect your work because they're so good. And so long after you're dead and this person's dead and their family is dead, people are still reading it and making fun of them like generations on. So like there is actual power here. Sort of, it's something we don't really talk about because we don't have the opportunity. But like the power of mimetic ideas or whatever, like, it's crazy. You could talk about that for a long time, and it affects everything from how we choose who we marry and like, procreate with, to the type of entertainment we like, all that kind of stuff. And I think we could have a long discussion about that with language and the power there, but that's probably for a different episode.
I would agree, but the gist of what you're saying is definitely applicable here, and it shows why these runes represent something more than just these concrete symbols, right? It's significant, and discovering that is significant, and it's interesting that they choose this as the ultimate thing that Odin could win. Like, he doesn't win things that aren't realistic, you know what I mean? Like Gilgamesh, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the famous Babylonian story, he's on a quest to find eternal life, but he doesn't get it. His story is not a victory. He does not get eternal life, and Odin doesn't get eternal life, and Odin doesn't get the eternal prosperity of his society. Ragnarok happens. Like, his society is going to fall and fail. What he wins is something that realistically and probably concretely improves the lives of his people, of his tribe, of himself. He goes and achieves and learns, and his imagination grows, expands, he thrives, he grows, all of that. He does well for himself. By doing that, though, he's brought out something magical in a different sense of the word than, hocus pocus magic, but in a sense of like, he has gone and discovered something or found something or mastered something. And here's why, actually, if you look at, the historical way that this writing system probably actually developed, and maybe that takes a little bit of the luster off of it for you, that this isn't something that was just pulled out of thin air by some figure like Odin for the Vikings, for the Norse people. Well, they still had to figure out how to use it. They still had to see the value and see the importance of it, right? And, well, that's magic too.
Absolutely.
So that's what Odin wins, and that's what sacrifice can get you. So
yeah, it's awesome.
It is. So shall we move on?
Yes, let's move on.
And from here on out, we're going to be doing one stanza at a time. So this one will be 145, and then we're one at a time from there, if you're following along. Back to the poem. It is better not to pray at all than to pray for too much. Nothing will be given that you won't repay. It is better to sacrifice nothing than to offer too much. Odin carved this before the birth of humankind, when he rose up and returned again.
So this is, I'd say it's kind of a hard lesson. It's true though, part of it is about biting off more than you can chew, or setting yourself up to sacrifice more than you are capable of or prepared to. And I think a lot of people, well, I know a lot of people do this, and probably the most common way is in the gym, where they try and lift too much weight and then can't walk for the next few days because they've overdone it. And like I'm 100% guilty of that for sure. It's like, oh, I can do that. I saw some guy on social media doing this. I can do that too. You have to be worthy of the sacrifice and the reward you're making, or the sacrifice you're making in order to get the reward. You have to be worthy of it. And I think too, when I say praying too much, I almost wonder too if that's like almost too much planning as well, where you're thinking about it, you're not actually doing it. You're hoping for, again, like something magical to happen so that you don't have to go through the sacrifice. You just have it handed to you or something like that. And I love the part where it says Odin carved this before the birth of mankind when he rose up and returned again, because it gives it a mythological perspective that this sort of deal that we have, where if you sacrifice the right things, you can get a reward out of it. It's like this is the way of the world, and it has been since before humanity was around. And because of that, you know that you can trust it, that you will be able to do it if you follow the proper procedures with it. And I also think it's interesting. We talked a little bit about it with the archetype of you were talking about Odin going to the underworld and getting the reward. I mean, that's sort of the stereotypical hero. Like, that's exactly what the hero's doing, is going into the unknown, the underworld, and then bringing back the reward of gold, or the virginal princess. And I think we're seeing sort of a nod towards that idea that, Odin carved this before the birth of humankind when he rose up and returned again. So he's done this before humanity has been around. So it's ancient, and I guess because I guess they're trying to say that it's true because it's been around for so long and it's worked for that amount of time.
That's a really good point. I didn't go there with this, actually. So no, that's great to point out now that you say it. That's I think that's right though, because it's saying something about the nature of the world, as you said. So that's great. I agree with you about sort of praying too hard could be something like over fixation, like getting too focused on one thing, and maybe you start to not see the rest of life. You start to only focus on that one thing that you want, and maybe you're going to get exactly what you want too. Maybe you get exactly what you pray for, and it doesn't turn out to be what you thought. You know what I mean? But I think the idea is that if you sacrifice too much, you can have permanent damage. Or if you order the world too much, you then become a tyranny. You become stagnant. And the idea is that you don't want to go to extremes. You don't want to sacrifice so much that you can't recover and become more through that sacrifice. And you could do that in a literal sense. Like, if you just give away everything you own to anyone who asks, and you're just making sacrifices for people, maybe they will take care of you one day, but that's hard to do that, right? Like, to give your home to someone else or give all your food away or something like that. Yeah, like if you give all your food away, you'll starve. Your family will starve, something like that. So that's right.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, like, if you make a huge sacrifice for the wrong people or the wrong thing, like giving your food away, well, like what are your kids going to eat? Like you have to make the right sacrifices to get a good reward, not just, giving everything away and do it for the right reason. Like, I don't think I'm shocking anyone by saying you should probably have more allegiance to your children than, a stranger that, so.
There's philosophical arguments that would say that why is one person worth more than another, et cetera, and honestly, I don't want to get into that right now, but sure. That is a thing. So
that is a thing for sure.
I think we're of the opinion that you take care of your direct family first and their well-being, and then you can improve your more immediate community and grow from there.
Absolutely, yeah, I'm definitely there.
And I think we've backed that up. We've seen that be backed up in other parts of the Hávamál.
Oh, definitely. Like that too.
So, no, this is a great stanza, and it really it kind of caps this whole section off with just the warning that you have to do it right. You have to walk that line. You have to strike that balance. You can't sacrifice too much. Sacrificing and sacrificing nothing being better than that. That's kind of funny, right? He's saying that you get the reward by sacrificing, but it's probably worse. You don't want to leave yourself worse off by doing it. And I wouldn't say that's to say don't take the risk. That's just make sure you're taking the right risk.
And you're prepared for it. As like the rest of the Havamal has told us, be prepared for what you're doing. So, yeah.
And I think, to me, that caps off this massive section of Odin's wisdom, how to sacrifice and gain the reward and gain deep knowledge. It's being quite something.
Yeah, because as we go forward, it's just going to be sort of like the cool things you can do if you've mastered all of this, I guess. But at least that's sort of how I'm taking it. But no, this is really the culmination. What we've just gone through is the culmination of the Havamal and sort of anything, just how you live a good life. And like, why would you want to? Well, because you'll be able to make the right sacrifices of the right magnitude for the best rewards. You'll be able to get to the top of your dominance hierarchy.
Well, and I think it's the culmination of Norse wisdom as they understood it at the point of writing this down, because including this in Odin's wisdom is sort of saying something like, this is important because this is how this works. It's a roadmap, and it really is a philosophical contribution, and it's one of the things that we've certainly been searching for and looking for, and they understood the concept of sacrifice, and it's evident here. And of course, other mythologies, other civilizations have come to similar realizations, but we're looking here and we're looking for value here. And that's sort of the point, is that we're trying to find the best lessons we can extract from these old stories. And this is one of the best.
Oh, definitely. And there might be a question too of, well, why would we look here? Because, we aren't all still, worshiping Odin or whatever. And Western civilization has been, some would say, more influenced by the church. I think, and to that, I think I argued that, well, one, our political systems are directly related to the political systems that they had at the time. And a lot of that, like the Norse and Germanic peoples and Scandinavian peoples had at the time. So a lot of our civic values come from that. And as well, like the church and Christianity, there was a lot of syncretism, or sort of a mixing of the beliefs in order to bring everyone together under the same tent. They keep moving the tent poles out so more people can come in, for the people that weren't killed or whatever. But so there is value here because this is very much still a part of the lives that we have now, and it's one of the roots of our thinking, of our institutions, of our civic discourse, all that kind of stuff. That you can see the roots. You can see some roots here. Like I'm not going to say that it's all this, and the church stole all of it, and there's a lot of mixing and matching and syncretism that went on, and I think it's important that you do go back to to the roots of it, so that you can see like why is it that we behave in certain ways, believe what we do, and act how we do. So there's real value here.
Exactly. And I mean, the whole thing about it is that, I mean, one answer to the question of why are we exploring this material here, one answer is just because we want to and it's cool. But really, there is more to it than that. And it is because of those things. It is because this is some of the underlying material of how our civilization was developed. And we want to explore that to the fullest extent. And seeing ideas like this come out of that, it's not even just sort of satisfying to see that this existed here and that these ideas weren't just in, say, because I will be clear here that the story of Odin's sacrifice on the tree, it bears a lot of actual similarities to the Christ story on the cross, and I'm not the right person to talk about that. But the idea of sacrifice and taking up the cross voluntarily, all of that, there's so many parallels, and you could be tempted to say maybe there was some influence in the writer and kind of made that work, but I don't think so. I think this is just one of those ideas that you have to understand as a society, as a culture, in order to get to a certain point and to start thriving and growing beyond a certain level, a certain point. You have to understand these ideas of sacrifice, whether it's through ritual sacrifice, which is in effect sort of a ritual drama of kind of reenacting the things that are seen as ideal, but then you're making sacrifices towards that ideal, and on some symbolic level aligning yourself with those ideals. Like this is found everywhere, almost universally, but then it's the enunciation of that and how this works and how this works to create a better life. Seeing this here is just, I think, confirmation that there is a contribution to be made to us in the modern age from this material, from these myths and legends. That's why we're here.
Absolutely.
And I think we might as well move on. Yep. On to a different sort of thing, kind of to end us off here. Different section. Back to the poem. I know magic spells that no woman knows, and no man either. The first is called Help, and it will help you in lawsuits and sadness and all kinds of worries.
So I take this, I think it's interesting that this is the first magic spell that he knows, and that, no woman knows it, no man either. And the first is called Help. And it helps with lawsuits, sadness, and all kinds of worries. I think from what I can gather from this, it would be something to do with getting rid of, or at least soothing the anxiety of life. Because, we all know anxious men and anxious women, and, well, humans in general aren't great at dealing with chaotic things, or like in this case, they talk about lawsuits as well. That's order as well. There's definite stress in life, and I don't think we need to prove that. It's just life is hard. And for the very first spell, I think he's saying, well, I know a spell that will help you through all of that. And he doesn't really tell us what it is, which is kind of too bad. But I think it's sort of this catch-all spell of like, yeah, life's hard, but I know a way that you're going to be able to get help, and you're going to be able to maybe not relax, but at least not be, a screaming mess the whole time.
Okay, so magic spells. My interpretation of this. So yeah. If you're saying that Odin has a spell and a way to kind of make that work, yeah. That's kind of like, it'd be helpful to know what that spell is, and of course he doesn't tell us what they are here actually. But my interpretation of what these magic spells are, and this might be oversimplifying it. Maybe this is something that is going to go. This is out of left field, and this isn't exactly right, maybe. But I think these are just things that are useful to know. And for people who don't know them, they would come across as magical.
Oh, absolutely.
That's my interpretation of what this entire section is. There's 18 of them, so we're going to go through 18 of them. But for what this is, I think it's like all of these are going to be enunciating something that it's useful to know how to counter or how to do. And then Odin knows, right? So Odin has gone and searched for knowledge, and these magic spells are, I think, ways of encountering the world and encountering regular everyday situations and triumphing over them in a way that maybe most people wouldn't know how to do.
I also suspect that if you were to look at each of these spells and go back for the Havamal, you might be able to find ideas on how to achieve all of these things.
I agree. Now, my interpretation of this first one, and this may be right out of left field, and I might be wrong. I think help means asking for help. I think it means if you don't know how to do something, ask someone else. Ask someone else. If it's in a case of a lawsuit, you ask a lawyer. If it's a case of sadness, you ask someone who maybe has been through a similar situation. All kinds of worries, ask for help. Ask for someone who has been through that situation before, what they did, and in general, I think that's going to help.
I like that. And it's great because I think both men and women are not great at asking for help. So it's just like no one is really good at asking for help. So no, that's I like that a lot.
Yeah, that's my best shot at this. And again, it all hinges on the translation here of the word help and everything.
Sure.
But I think that's if that's literally what this means, well, that's my best idea for it. And for most of these magic spells, I think whatever I'm going to be able to guess at is going to be very tenuous. But this one, I kind of like it, actually.
Yeah, no, I like that one. I like that one a lot. I like it.
Cool. Shall I move on?
Yes.
All right, back to the poem. I know a second spell which men need if they want to heal others. And that's it.
Yeah. I take that as, well, one, it like physical healing, like some medicinal knowledge, knowing the lore around certain plants and herbs and that kind of thing. I could also see it as, if you wanted to heal like relationships, so like forgiveness, that kind of thing, apology, that those types of things. So I think for me, I could go either way, and if someone could prove one way or the other, I'd be like, yes, that sounds right.
Right. And for me, if I'm thinking literally and concretely, I think we have that spell, and that spell is the entire process of becoming a doctor. You know what I mean? Like, and that's almost to emphasize something about here. It takes X number of years, 8 years, 10 years, 12 years to become a doctor, like all the way. And that is the amount of time you need to be studying this stuff in order to be considered someone who is competent of healing others, at least physically, today in the modern era. And that just shows how like significant the knowledge that Odin knows is, and shows how significant it is to know what he knows. And another, maybe a side point on this, is that it's not, I don't think it's necessarily important to know everything that Odin is saying here. He's just saying he knows this stuff and these are useful things to know, I think. And so not everyone's going to become a doctor or a practitioner of traditional medicine or what have you, of psychological healing, anything like that. But they are useful to have in society. I think we can all agree. And it's useful and valuable to have gone and done that and to dedicate your life to it, you know?
Absolutely. And I was just thinking, it takes 10,000 hours of practicing something to become a master at it. And Odin knows all these things. Like, it's a very idealized idea that, you know, you're not going to be able to master all of these spells. You'd have to put in the 10,000 hours to at least approach what Odin is getting. And that, I think that's why he's a god. He's at the very top of every dominance hierarchy. And that you know, as a mere human, you get to pick like one. Well, you're part of more than one dominance hierarchy. You're actually part of all of these dominance hierarchies. You can only pick a few though that you're going to try to get to the top of, because you can't do everything.
Yeah, it's the limitation, unfortunately, of humanity, and it's why Odin is that example. He is the one who has climbed to the top of all the dominance hierarchies, and he is that example. He's what you can shoot for, though, is sort of the thing. It's like you can shoot for being as good as possible in as many things as possible. You can aim for that. It's a good aim.
Absolutely.
Back to the poem. I know a third spell if I have a great need to thwart my enemies. I dull the edges of their weapons, and none of their blades will bite.
So I don't know if this would be something like sabotage, or maybe arousing speech that makes them not want to fight your army, or something like that. It's an idea that you can influence your enemies so that they don't want to or can't attack you anymore.
Right, and I mean, for me, maybe on a more, if you take this one level up, I think is doing what you can, whatever you can, to prevent your enemies to dull them. Like, this could even be like a case of having good arguments that you can back up, that if you're in an argument, you can minimize the so-called damage of the other person's argument, your enemies, whatever. Like, or if it's like kind of in a physical fight, knowing how to defend yourself and knowing how to deflect, minimize what's going to happen. Like, it's sort of, to me, I think this is kind of a meta spell of sort of taking precautions against negative things. And it's sort of, maybe it's a little confusing in the case of like, it's talking about dulling the enemy's weapons, but I think that works though, because it's sort of, it's not precautions you take yourself necessarily. Like, you could be literally sabotage, but like it's those things that you do to make the things that are attacking you have less effect, something like that, on a meta level.
For sure. No, I like that. I like that a lot.
Shall we? Yeah.
Let's.
I think we're gonna blast through these.
Yeah.
Honestly, after the slow pace of something like an hour to get through 4 stanzas. Yeah. Back to the poem. I know a fourth spell if chains and locks are placed upon my limbs. I cast this spell so that I can escape. The chains burst from my hands. The locks burst from my feet.
So I'm trying to think of a meta way to look at this, and other than like Harry Houdini, I'm not coming up with too much other than Well, actually, I would just avoid having chains locks placed on the limbs, and uh, so that I wouldn't get caught. Hopefully, I mean, but I wonder too if it's more metaphorical, like if you can be in certain situations where we are kind of like locked down and you have to escape somehow. And it's usually through some poor decision making on your own. And then you have to make sacrifices and fight hard to free yourself of it so that you can move on with your life.
Yeah, that's roughly where I went. Where something like if you're in a situation that constrains you metaphorically, that you're able to work your way out of it, something like that. That's where I went with it. And on the literal level of chains and locks and stuff, like that can be hard to get out of. And of course, it would be magical if you're able to get out of a situation like that, But on a metaphorical level, if it's something like you're able to escape out of situations that leave you with very little option, that'd be a good thing to know how to do. And I don't think it's something you necessarily know how to do until you're in that situation. But then it's maybe it's something like the resiliency and the determination to find a solution and get yourself out of that situation and move forward with your life.
Yeah, I like that.
Best I can come up with anyway. So back to the poem. I know a sixth spell. If a man carves it. Oh, I skipped one. Sorry. Let's redo this. Back to the poem. I know a fifth spell. If I see a spear cast into a crowd of battling foes, it cannot fly so fast that I can't change its course as long as I can see it.
I like this one because I actually think this one might be an easier one to interpret. And these are our interpretations. We're pretty liberally interpreting them. It's not, I don't think many people have done a lot of research on what these spells actually might mean. Like, not, if you've read any like academic papers on these spells, like I'd be super interested in reading them. So be sure to like let us know and post a link or whatever. But yeah, we're doing our best to figure out what magic means in this context. But this one, I think it's just seeing things that are happening or situations that can go wrong or go sideways, and that if you can see it coming, then you can deal with it. It reminds me of the idea is like it's you've got your known knowns and your known unknowns, and then your unknown unknowns, and the unknown unknowns that are going to get you. Usually because you didn't know you had to watch out for them. And that's why he says, as long as I can see it, I can do something about it. And that's sort of what I get from this, is that as long as you can see the spear come like flying through the air, you can do something about it.
Yeah, I think it's something like seeing the big picture, like seeing the broader way of things happening, because you're seeing a spear cast, and that's symbolic. Like Odin would cast a spear over a battle, and that would like be the shape of the battle, like the result of the battle would be known there. And so I think this is something like seeing the big picture in general, like the strategy as opposed to the tactics. You don't get yourself lost in the low level details, and you're able to influence a situation on a higher level, something like that.
For sure.
So it and all of this, it goes into something like, I think it's like detaching from the all the little details that are happening around you, and then taking that step back and seeing the big picture. And that's from Jocko Willink and Leif Babin's Extreme Ownership, by the way.
I thought I recognized that.
We are influenced by them, for sure. Check out that book. It's a good one. Back to the poem. I know a sixth spell. If a man carves a curse against me in runes on the root of a tree, I call this spell down upon that man, and his curse harms him instead of me.
So I think this actually fits in well with the magic that I've been talking about earlier, where, if someone were to write a funny poem about you and it brought shame upon you, well, if you were able to then like redirect it or write a poem yourself, you could bring harm upon them. Because like, what's better than like someone says something that's pretty funny at someone else's expense, but then they have like the perfect comeback. Like, that to me is what this is. Like, it's that perfect comeback where you weren't expecting it, and now they look like an idiot for going after you, and you look like a hero. Like, it completely changes the situation. So when I read that, I was like, yeah, I've seen this before, where someone is trying to curse you, but your comeback is it's such a wicked burn.
Right. Something like just in general being able to turn negative intentions back on someone else. Like, being able to do that is going to get you far socially. You'll be able to hold your own in situations where people are teasing one another, on a more light level. That's going to build camaraderie, sort of thing. But even in a more negative sense, where it's like someone has malicious intentions towards you, being able to see that happening and deal with it and turn that back around for your own self-preservation, it's something useful to know how to do. Something useful to at least know the blueprint of how to do. And maybe actually that's a clarification here. I think some of this stuff that we're talking about with these spells, it's a lot of like, it's good to know roughly how to do this. It's good to prepare for these sorts of situations.
For sure.
Because they're not always going to be identical, right? But then you can take that meta knowledge, that blueprint, and figure something out with it.
For sure. It's easy to take our Havamal episodes sort of in a vacuum because we have to break it up into different episodes, but they all go together. And so all of the previous things we've seen in the Havamal still apply here. So absolutely being prepared and proficient in what you're doing we're seeing a lot of that right here, right?
For sure. For sure. Back to the poem. I know a seventh spell. If I see a great flame consuming a hall full of people, it cannot burn so bright that I cannot save those inside. I know how to cast this spell.
So I don't think it's necessarily referring to an actual hall that's on fire, because we can't control fire like that. At least not back then. Now we've got modern firefighting techniques or whatever. But I do think there's an idea that maybe it's a group of people in trouble, and he's able to do something to, like, no matter what the trouble is, he's able to do something that will help the people escape it or deal with it.
This spell could be something like bravery, like
for sure
the bravery of going into a burning building to save the people inside. Because I don't think this is talking about saving the hall.
No,
it's saving the people inside. And we regard firefighters like very, very highly.
Definitely.
There's calendars of them because they tend to be great physical specimens. They go out into these burning buildings and save the people inside, save pets, all that. Like, it's a big deal, and it's very heroic, and I think it takes a lot of bravery. And maybe that's what this spell actually is, something like that.
I like it, a spell for bravery.
Or at least because what does Dr. Peterson say? He says something like you don't if you're afraid of something, you don't become less afraid of it, you become braver.
That's right.
Like if you're afraid of elevators, for example, you're like deathly afraid of them, you won't go in them because you believe you're going to die. Because anyone has gone into an elevator and died, you're definitely going to die if you go into this elevator, something like that. The treatment that he prescribes is like sort of gradually exposing this person to the elevator, and eventually they're able to take an elevator. Like eventually they're able to look at an elevator and not collapse out of mortal fear, then they're able to stand in front of an elevator. They're able to go inside the elevator but not let the doors close. They're able to let the doors close and take a ride in the elevator, and it's okay. But he says that, and I'm, he's got the backup for this, the research to back this up. But what he says is that you do not lose the fear of elevators. You become braver and more able to face the scary elevator, and that's valuable.
Definitely. I remember I was like 3 or 4 and I heard in the news someone died in an elevator and I was terrified. Like, because I thought the doors were going to cut me in half. I think that's what happened to someone in the news, and it was like far off place from where I grew up. But I remember hearing it on the radio, and I was like deathly afraid of elevators when I was like a young kid. I'm fine now, but I look back and to prove your point, I don't think I ever stopped being afraid of elevators. It's just I grew up and realized, okay, actually the chances of this are very small. We've got they all have their little certificate of like inspections, all fine. Like I was able to, my mind became strong enough to like rationalize like, well, this is going to be okay, rather than like, elevators getting less scary.
Well, something that would, I think, in general be scary to just about anyone, though, is a burning building.
Yes.
And honestly, those people who are able to go into a burning building and go and save the people inside of it, that's bravery. And
for sure.
Honoring that here back in Havamal stanza 152, that's pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
Back to the poem. I know an 8th spell. It would be useful for anyone to learn it. When hate arises between any two people, I can cool their tempers.
So this is actually like an important spell, and one that if you've ever seen it happen, it does seem like magic. But when someone is able to diffuse an intense situation between people who are like at each other's throats and hate each other, like that is something to behold. That is almost like hocus pocus Harry Potter magic. You're just watching the situation that is about to explode, and then someone is able to come in and calm everything down. Like that is magic.
Definitely, it's massive, and I mean this one is one of the more straightforward things that I think you can understand as valuable, and it appears to be magical, but having that way with people, that touch with people, I don't think everyone has that, honestly. And that's why it would be considered magic, because it's not just something like, oh, well, I did this. It's like there's something else that a person is able to do to be able to calm a situation like that. It's pretty cool.
It's very cool.
No one did that with Khabib Nurmagomedov.
No.
They just ramped that up. They ramped that conflict up. And, well, we're recording the day after the Khabib Conor McGregor fight. Just FYI.
Madness.
This isn't a sports podcast, so we'll not talk any further about that. Back to the poem. I know a 9th spell, if the need arises, for me to save a ship upon the sea. I can calm the wind upon the waves and soothe the sea to sleep.
So I know why this spell would be so important for the people back in the day, because they were a seafaring people. The Norse, more than like forests and mountains and all that kind of stuff, they were known as like people of the sea that were all, I mean, their boats were incredible. They were sort of marvels of that age. And so this is a huge help for them. And I think you can bring it up to a higher level in that, if you take the analogy to just anything that you're doing and you're going through a rough patch of it or a rough time and things are looking unsure, this is a spell that would calm things down and help you get through it, so that things seem like, well, things just seem better, and that, at the end of it, it's okay, and your ship has survived, or you have survived, and you're able to continue on with your task.
Right. I mean, I think we understand literally scientifically that you can't control the weather. That would be magical.
That would be.
But the whole thing here is that the ability to steer through that, like the ability to maintain through the storm and survive afterwards, like that would be considered very useful. And if I'm taking this one level up, it would be sort of like steering yourself through the unknown, like through the metaphorical storm, and the sea being a symbol of the unknown in general as well. Like we've established that the sea is essentially the equivalent of this undifferentiated chaos and all that. We've established that, but being able to steer through that and get through a rough period of time where things are chaotic and maybe it's like it could actually threaten your life and livelihood sort of thing. Being able to steer yourself through that calmly and understand the way the metaphorical waves are working and all that until it calms down. Like maybe you could sort of see it as it's magical that you survive long enough for the sea to calm down. If you're going to kind of turn it on its head and if we're not accepting the premise that it's possible to have a spell that calms the wind, maybe it's that it's possible to survive until the wind's calm.
For sure. And I think we're also going to get messages about, what do they call it? It's like HAARP or something. HARP. It's supposedly a weather controlling thing. I think we're going to get links, and I'm not saying that I would like links to YouTube videos explaining it, but no, there is a conspiracy.
Joe Rogan did an episode on his first TV show, like not Fear Factor, Joe Rogan Questions Everything. Yeah. You're right. I didn't think of that.
I'm not saying I believe that. I'm just saying,
we might get links. Okay.
People do believe that.
Feel free to share if you like. Yeah. If you like, just I'm
always up for a good conspiracy theory.
Sounds good. We're not endorsing that though.
No, not endorsing, but it's fun to look at and think about.
Sounds good.
Like Ancient Aliens.
Right. Entertaining show.
Absolutely.
Back to the poem. I know a 10th spell. If I see witches at play in the air, I can cast this spell so that they get lost, so that they can't find their skins, so that they can't find their minds.
Now, this is an interesting stanza. So there's a whole bunch of ideas around witches. One playing in the air, I'm going to get to that because that is fascinating. But the idea that they can't find their skins, can't find their minds, there is an idea that witches could take another form and literally like take off their body and then go into another body and that kind of thing. But I want to talk a little bit about witches playing in the air because it's a very, very common and just ubiquitous symbol of witches. I mean, the witch on the broom flying against the full moon. I mean, that is, when you think of a witch, that's what it is. And there's an actual like source to this. And it is, I would be less shocked if I actually saw a woman on a broom flying against the night than what it actually means. So, and this is not, again, this is true. This is like well documented. This isn't like weird pseudoscience or whatever. What would happen is that witches, or well, I guess, let's say, Christian women who are less, less in the cities, more in the outskirts of town, like, pagans or heathens, people of the heart, sort of, they would know a lot about herbs and plants and whatever, and they would make a witch's brew. And this would include, what's that mushroom with the red and the white, like fly agaric, whatever?
Yes, that.
Yeah.
Amanita muscaria?
Yes. They'd mush this stuff together, and it would have obviously like psychoactive chemicals and hallucinogenic effects. And they had to figure out a way to to ingest it or to use it. And the eating it wasn't the best way because some of the compounds would deteriorate in stomach acid and all that kind of stuff. And so they discovered the best way was actually through a mucous membrane. And so they would take their brooms, they would grease it with like bear fat, put the witch's brew on it, and then insert it into themselves. And that's where the image of flying on the broomstick came from. And they would go on these like crazy trips because, and I don't, like, first of all, it's crazy, but we should, like, it's not that crazy because there's a long tradition. We've talked about Odin as a shaman and magician, and we haven't talked at all about sort of the female side where it has like a far richer and deeper tradition of like shamanism and witchcraft and magic. Like, in fact, Odin has to learn magic from Freya and gets made fun of for doing unmanly things because he's done this, right? So there's Odin who does magic, and then there's like the rest of women who just do magic. So this isn't that. The idea that women would do this isn't that crazy, but just that, like, what they're actually doing, wow, that's kind of nuts.
I'd like to know how they came up with that in the first place.
I don't know. Like, I don't know how you would. Well, I mean, kids do it these days with, like, I've heard of people like using vodka and cotton balls and inserting them in various orifices to get drunk without drinking. You don't do that because it'll probably kill you. There's like, you can't, if you're actually ingesting the alcohol, drinking it, it's a much better gauge as to whether or not you're getting alcohol poisoning. And drugs, like all sorts of drugs are used through mucous membranes, and the bear fat was important because a lot of drugs to taken in and absorbed through the body, they need to be in fat. So I know like marijuana is one of them that you need fat to sort of release the oils or whatever. I'm not exactly sure how that works, but they're fat soluble, I guess is the point. And yeah, so that's the crazy history of that image.
Yeah, again, that still doesn't answer how they thought of that in the first place, but still, I suppose people with time on their hands and,
looking for a trip and
yeah, just see if this works. Sounds good. No, that is nuts, and that's a really good story. Really good story. And I think for my perspective on this is that, witches flying in the air sort of thing is kind of like saying like chaotic influences in your life or even chaotic people in your life and being able to avoid that and get them to leave you alone sort of thing.
For sure.
If we're going on a more literal level, not a spell to get rid of witches, even though I'm sure they probably needed a spell they probably used spells to get rid of witches back in the day.
Well, yeah, I mean, how could you have a nice time with them? Think of how like messed up they would be. Like, it'd be terrifying. I'm sure they actually like, there's a Norse magic called Save, and it was like it's trance work for divination and that kind of stuff, like when to plant and grow crops and all that kind of all those things, which is also a very shamanic practice. So, and I'm sure that's one of the ways they would get into trances as well, right? So, no, it's crazy.
No, it's pretty cool, and a very specific spell or bit of knowledge that Odin knows, but I think it still is applicable today, just in the sense of chaotic personalities or limiting the influence of chaotic people, something like that. That's what I read into it.
No, for sure, I would agree.
All right, back to the poem. I know an 11th spell If I lead old friends into a battle, I enchant their shields so that they will have the victory. They will go to battle unharmed and return from battle unharmed. They will come home without harm.
For this one, I really think this is that rousing speech that inspires everyone. That you're all going off to battle, or really to do whatever, but you're going with a feeling of confidence and friendship with people around you, and you trust everyone. Everyone trusts you. It's sort of that. I'm sure we've all experienced that when we're going off to do something, and it wouldn't necessarily be battle, but it could just be really anything, a team sport, and going out and knowing that no matter what happens, you're going to be doing your very best. Now, I don't think you can actually prevent harm in a battle, or in sports. The other team is going to score points, but I do think that at the end of it, even if you lose, it's not like a crushing defeat. It's we lost, and you'll recover and be able to fight again.
Sure, and I mean on another level too. Like, of course, you can't prevent harm necessarily, but if you're going into actual battle, you don't want your friends to die. And on a psychological level, like, this would be something incredibly valuable if it's like, I know a spell that will prevent your friends from harm. I mean, I think that's actually a significant thing, and why this would be something that would be included in a list like this. This would be valuable to the people whose lives would have been very much influenced by battle and all that. Like Jocko and Leif, they have talked about how they would rather trade places with the SEALs who died under their command than have them die, right? And because that's a sense of like camaraderie, and like you don't want to lose your friends, you don't want to lose them to violence, to battle, and that's got to be a really hard thing. And they of course can talk much better about that because they lived it, Jocko and Leif. But if I'm taking a guess beyond any sort of like a rousing speech, for me it's something like minimizing the risk for your team, your friends. If you're leading them into battle, if you are the leader, minimizing that risk to them, minimizing that risk of literal injury, but also kind of the figurative injury, or injury that's not life and limb, but that's like economic, something like that.
For sure. No, I like that.
A call to lead responsibly.
For sure.
So, and that is definitely something that Jocko Willink and Leif Babin can talk much more about in their books, are recommended if you want to learn more about that.
Definitely. Absolutely.
So, okay, back to the poem. I know a 12th spell. If I see, hanging from a tree, a dead man's corpse, I carve some runes and paint them, and then that corpse will walk and speak with me.
This one's interesting because Odin often, on more than one occasion, speaks with the dead, practices necromancy, and wakes someone up. I think even Mimir is dead, and I mean it's kind of his advisor. But then there's also a witch that he resurrects to talk to about. I think it's about Balder and Ragnarok, and there's some discussion around whether the seeress in the Voluspa is actually that undead witch. So there is a lot of sort of talking to the dead, and so at least on that level, there's no surprise that we see it here that Odin knows how to do this. Well, of course, we've seen it a few times. And I think for us to, well, in some ways, for us to learn the spell, it's kind of what we're all doing here, in my estimation, is that we're learning from the dead. I mean, the people who've written these books are long gone. but we're still talking about the lessons. We're still writing about it. We're still delving into it. And in some ways they are, reaching through the ages and talking to us. So I think that's one way of interpreting this spell.
I agree. Something like, well, first of all, learning that knowledge from dead men. Yeah, I hadn't gone there, but learning from the fate of dead men, like learning the lessons of history, not repeating history. And I mean, I think we sort of understand that it can be futile to, well, if you don't, how's the quote go? If you don't learn from history, you're doomed to repeat it, something like that. And I think it's something like this. Odin wants to know why this person died, why this person met their fate the way they did, and maybe avoid doing what they did.
For sure. It's also interesting to note Odin is the sort of the god of hanging. So he'd be very, very comfortable and sort of very much in this world where he'd want to talk to a hanged corpse.
Yeah, most people aren't comfortable with that.
Yeah.
But maybe that's the lesson of what you can draw from that, is to pay attention to how people died so you don't repeat their mistake.
For sure.
All right, back to the poem. I know a 13th spell. If I sprinkle water upon a newborn boy, he will never be killed, even if he goes into battle. That man will not die from violence.
So this one makes me think of the fairy tale of Snow White, because Snow White. No, sorry, Sleeping Beauty. I got those mixed up because of Disney, I think. But yeah, Sleeping Beauty. So king and queen have a baby, and they're going to celebrate her christening, and just they love their baby so much and never want anything bad to happen to the baby. So they don't invite like the Wicked Witch or whatever the. I guess it depends which version you get, but basically a Wicked Witch to the christening, and then a lot of bad things happen because baby was not exposed to and was not welcoming of chaos and undifferentiated chaos. And I think when we see the sprinkle of the water upon the newborn boy, we're seeing that recognition that the baby needs to be exposed to this chaos so that they can grow. And I mean, I don't think you can actually prevent them from dying in battle, but maybe you can prevent like their spirit from dying in battle. And that if they fight and they survive, they aren't just a broken person after that. That they'll be able to continue on.
Yeah, that's I like that. That's reasonable. Something. Yeah, I was thinking it was, again, another one of those things where it would be just incredibly valuable for the people in that society to sort of have something where, yeah, you can protect your kids from violence, from harm. And I mean, we see that in the myth of Balder, right? How Frigg enchants he gets all the things to agree not to hurt Balder, but then he gets hurt by the one thing that she doesn't think of, right? The mistletoe. And, well, I was kind of reading this as the futility of doing that, though, honestly, because you say this. Well, Odin lost his son, right? So maybe this would be a spell that he would want to know, because he lost a son because he was not invulnerable. So knowing a spell that would make him invulnerable would be quite something. But I like your take on it, that it could be something like something that would allow for the encountering of those negatives and still survive. That's pretty cool.
Awesome.
All right, back to the poem. I know a 14th spell. It allows me to count all the gods for men. I know the names of all the gods and elves, and few who are fools can say that.
So I think this one is talking about knowing the rules of the game, or knowing how life is lived and how to live a successful life, because he's talking about knowing all of the tops of the dominance hierarchies in the gods, and he knows the names of all the gods and the elves. And if we look at elves as sort of honored ancestors, as some scholars do, it's kind of like knowing who's best at what. And if you know that, then you know who to emulate and know why they're great at what they're doing. So I think that this spell is one of those things where it's like I know how to get better and who to emulate to live a life, and not you're kind of foolish if you don't.
Sure, and I also kind of went to something like the breadth of knowledge, like trying to know as much as possible about specific things. Like it's good to do that because you organize the world kind of in your head. You have a map of the important things to know about, and knowing the gods is like, yeah, that's knowing those important figures to emulate, and just having that example in your head is something positive, and it also shows that spirit of searching for knowledge too, which of course we have seen that Odin embodies, right? And that would be a good thing to do, would be to embody at least that side of Odin, was that seeking for knowledge.
Absolutely. I definitely agree.
All right, back to the poem. I know a 15th spell. The dwarf Thjolthrerir cast it upon Delling's doors. He conjured power for the gods and courage for the elves. They knew Odin.
So I looked for the translation of the name and I found it, but I think I forgot to write it down, which is annoying. But I think one of the things that we're seeing here is that knowing Odin and how do I explain this? That when you're looking at sort of going off into chaos and going through the door into the unknown, if you look at Odin as sort of the example of how you should act, then you're going to have power, you're going to have courage, you're going to be able to interact with the unknown in an effective way.
Sure, yeah, and I think part of this that I like is that the transmissibility. I didn't write down the translation of the name either, but the transmissibility of these spells too. It's sort of like it's not just confined to Odin as well. It's again showing that it's almost a universal. It's like having power and courage and going based on this example that Odin sets is just a good thing, and it shows that, well, if the dwarves and the elves are again our ancestors, it shows this is possibly how our ancestors survived.
Absolutely.
I honestly don't have much more on this one though.
This one's fairly puzzling,
and it doesn't go into much detail, honestly. So I think we'll move on. Back to the poem. I know a 16th spell. If I want to win over a cunning woman and have her all to myself, I can change the mind of that lovely armed beauty and win her favor for myself.
So I think for me, this one is fairly clear in a kind of a literal sense, is that he knows how to charm a woman with his words, and he knows how to behave, all that kind of stuff that will attract a woman of high quality to him. And maybe at first she was a little standoffish and aloof towards him, but he can win her over with his charm and his wit.
Yeah, getting the woman to choose him. He's able to change her mind, which I think is sort of key there, because it's like she's the one who's going to be doing the picking. Odin can want this woman all he likes, but he has to convince her. And understanding that is kind of important, because we know Odin is capable of being rapey. We see that specifically in Odin's love poem and also in Harbard's quite a bit. But he understands that in polite society you have to change a woman's mind or a person's mind if you want to be a little more general, but this is from Odin's perspective, who is a male god talking to men most likely here. So the funny thing here about this though is it's like it shows that you have to go through it the right way and change a woman's mind. It says something about like maybe in this day and age it can be hard for maybe men to know how they can proceed if flirting and things like that can be interpreted the wrong way as harassment, something like that. It can be hard to see how you could do that, and sometimes the answer I think that's going around is that if you get a no the first time, that's just got to be it. But in this case, he persists and eventually wins her over. I think what that is saying is something like, you have to do it the right way, though. There's a right way and a wrong way to approach those things, and being creepy or being a jerk is not the right way to win a lady over, even if she's initially reluctant. You can do it the right way and eventually win her affection, or you can approach things the wrong way, and that's just the wrong way.
So you're saying don't be a jerk. Oh.
That's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
yes.
And I think Odin is saying that as well here.
Well, he goes into great detail how his endeavors don't necessarily work out if he is the jerk, if he breaks trust, right? So that's earlier. That's Odin's love poem. That's pretty clear. But if he knows how to do it the right way,
Absolutely,
that's a good thing. So that would be the takeaway from this, is to approach romantic relationships and flirting and dating and all that. Approach it the right way and don't be a creepy jerk.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
Excellent. Back to the poem. I know a 17th spell to prevent a beautiful woman from shunning me. Lord Fafnir, all these spells would be useful to you all your life. They would profit you if you learned them. They'd do you good if you remembered them. They'd suit your needs if you could use them.
So it's funny because he just mentions, I know a spell to prevent a beautiful woman from shunning me, which is probably not all that different from 16th spell, because a lot of the same things would probably go into effect there, in being charming and, knowing how to talk to women as if they're, humans and that kind of thing. But it almost sounds like Lord Fafnir might be having a little bit of trouble in this department. And so Odin is saying, listen, I've got some good wisdom here, and it will help you out. And I think there's also the underlying idea that a man who has a beautiful woman by his side is probably better off than a man who's alone. I think it's sort of implicit in the in here, and really throughout the Havamal. But we could go through the benefits of men for being married, living longer, a whole bunch of, and they live longer because they're not trying to impress women with stupid things that they're going to do because of their testosterone. Because, and we've talked about this before, but testosterone is like the big killer of men. It's especially like young men. They're doing crazy things that if they thought about for just a little while longer, they'd be like, hey, this is not a good idea. I'm probably going to die. Now, men, their testosterone does drop when they get married, because again, they don't have to attract a mate. They've already got one. I would recommend, fighting against that a little bit and, keeping those T scores up, because it's really good for you. But I think the point is that it kind of civilizes men. It stops them from being, thuggish brutes, and lets them, become virtuous men. I think in the ideal that's sort of what a woman does for a man.
Right. And first of all, this is kind of 2 points here. The the 17th spell preventing a beautiful woman from shunning him. I think that almost, it says something like, okay, you've won a woman. One, I'm not talking about her as an objective prize. I'm saying the act of winning her affection. It's, yeah. But also know how to keep her. That would probably be pretty good too.
For sure.
Right. So, and that's any number of things of, being a good communicator or being faithful or all of those things that are being useful. Those are good things to know how to do or to strive to do. But then, well, kind of in general here though, Lord Fafnir, I think this is kind of the culmination, which he's saying, all of these things I'm telling you would be useful to know. And for some reason I went to a place here with this where it's like, I think we get, especially these days, we get a little bit of iconoclastic pushback against known wisdom, where it's like we want to dismantle all the systems because it's not working out in the way that I would necessarily like, or in a way that seems less unfair to me, something like that. But dismantling all the wisdoms, throwing it all out, sure, things could always be improved. Changing the way the world works takes time, and ignoring all of the previous wisdom is just going to, well, it results in mass revolutions, which in the experience of the history of the 20th century, a lot of the major revolutions eventually crumbled and did not succeed for one reason or another, and have eventually defaulted to systems that take accounting of the known wisdom and the traditions and use them in the modern sense, which I think is what we're trying to kind of reclaim here as well. So,
absolutely.
But everything you said there about the benefits of finding a good woman if you're a man, I think that's also very important. And we're both married, and very, very happy to be with my wife, and she has certainly been a calming influence and civilized me somewhat. So
who knows what I'd be setting on fire if I wasn't married?
Exactly.
How many illegitimate children would be out there?
That's right. It's a good thing. It's a good thing. Back to the poem. I know an 18th spell, which I will never teach to a girl or a woman, unless maybe to the one I call my wife or my sister. It is much better that one alone should know this, which is the last of the spells.
This one's cryptic, but it made me think there is, most traditional societies, there's knowledge that is specific for men and for women, and it actually is usually about how you relate to each other, and you don't share it because no one likes to see how the sausage is made. And because relationships between men and women are, they're messy, even like, happy relationships. It's weird because not only are you trying to relate to someone else who already, has different thoughts than you and sees things differently than you, even if you agree on things, you probably agree with each other. You've probably come to that agreement or those conclusions from a different angle. They're just another person. Then throw in the different biology, different biochemicals. It's a cliche for a reason that men are from Mars and women are from Venus. It can be they're from different planets. And I think there's knowledge that's shared among women and knowledge that's shared among men that about interacting with the opposite gender that you wouldn't necessarily want to share, and with the other gender. And one, I think that's fair. I don't necessarily need to know what it's like to be married to a man, because I'm not going to be married to a man. It's just same with My wife doesn't need to know what men know about women because she's a woman. She has, the knowledge that she needs. Uh, and it made me think too of this. It's another fairy tale of Bluebeard, and it's a very dark fairy tale. It's probably even dark because you know how Disney kind of like Disneyfied all of them, and well, some of them, and made them nicer. But so it'd be interesting if this is the sort of the original telling, or if it's even darker than this. But so Bluebeard is like a baron or a king, and he's got a new wife, and they love each other very much. And he says, "Okay, I've got to go off and do some business in the kingdom. Here's a key to all the doors in the castle, and I forbid you from opening this one door. It's to my room. Like, don't go in there while I'm gone, and everything's gonna be fine." Anyway, while he's gone, she of course goes into the room and finds all of his previous wives that he has strangled, and she of course is terrified. And then when he gets back, he sees that the door has been opened, and then he of course goes on to strangle his current wife. And the reason why I say that is that he kind of showed her too much, like behind the curtain. And it's not, we're talking about symbols again. This is important. I'm not like saying like, yeah, he let her know that he was a murderer, and like that jerk, she went and looked, like, what a jerk, she deserved. No, I'm not saying that. Symbolically, there is things about men that you might not want to show before women. And it's not, there's less severe ways of showing that too. Like when you're with your friends and you're, giving each other a hard time, everyone's laughing, having like the best time. You would never say those things to your wife and like treat her like that, because she's not your guy friend who, you're calling like poop stain or whatever from some terrible thing that happened in high school or whatever. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to make fun of your wife the way you make fun of your guy friend, because that's not what you do. And I think there is that sort of thread there, that there are things that men have that are just for men, just as there are things that women have that are just for women. I'm sure there are things that women talk about that men have no interest in knowing, and like let's keep some of the magic there, right?
For sure. And all I'll add to that, I completely agree. All I will add to that is that maybe there are certain things, because he says you maybe would share it with your wife or your sister.
For sure.
But maybe. So I think maybe he would share some stuff. So I think it's saying something like there are things that you share with your intimate partner or with your close family that you wouldn't share beyond that. And that's almost like the bond between partners or siblings or what have you, because it's there are just things that you share with your wife, your husband, or a brother, sister, something like that. That's different. Definitely that's different. I do not believe this stanza is implying anything incestuous, just saying. But it puts wife and sister in the same stanza. But anyway, the whole thing, I think, is that there are ways to forge relationships that necessarily would kind of keep things between you. Like it almost would be on the level of like in jokes in a friendship. That'd be a really light way of kind of thinking it, right? Like you have things that you do with like a close friend that you wouldn't do with anyone else, and that's just a mark of your friendship. And I would think in general there would be things that you and your spouse or you and your sibling would develop, and that shared knowledge, that shared experience would be something that is yours and it's unique to you, and you have that shared bond. So this is almost maybe like the other side from what you're saying, kind of the flip of this. So
yeah, no, I definitely see that too.
Either way, I think it says something about the transmission of knowledge and the way that you are with the people around you, that there are certain ways you act towards if you're a man, certain ways you act towards other men versus other women, not other women versus the way you act towards women, and vice versa. I'm sure that implies that as well. And then I think there's also things that forge that relationship of a man and a woman, or of siblings or something like that, that would be closer and they would have things that they do not share with the rest of society, kind of by design.
For sure. Absolutely. I definitely agree with that.
And with that, one last time, back to the poem. Now that the words of the one-eyed are heard in Valhalla, for the benefit of humans, for the harm of giants, health to you who speak them, health to you who know them, joy to you who learn them, health to you who hear them.
Jeez, that's like the nicest thing anyone's ever said to us. And I think this is saying, like, these are good lessons and they're for your benefit. It's for the harm of, the forces that would be against you. And sort of an idea that you need to be taught these lessons, which is why they were compiled. And it's good that, if you decide to learn them, if you decide to teach them, if you decide to pass this wisdom along, that you're doing something good in that. So, I actually hadn't read this last stanza until doing this one. So I didn't even know I didn't realize that we would be rewarded for going through all of this. Here it is.
No, it's the perfect, it ties everything together, and it sort of is an underscore under the whole Havamal. And you know what? It's funny. It is like a reward to the reader, where it's like, if you have learned and understood, I believe understood is in other translations, like joy to him who is understood, as well as learned is kind of the same thing. But if you've taken the time to read through this stuff and learn what it says, I don't think there's a way you can not be better for it. You know what I mean? Like, reading what the Havamal truly says and going through it and understanding it has certainly changed me, at least the way I look at a lot of things and the way I understand the interplay between the known and the unknown. And this is a general thing. Like, I'm sure you'll get something different out of it yourself personally if you read it, right? Like, anyone will. And it's like any other book of wisdom. It's got valuable lessons in it. It's useful if you learn it. It's useful if you read it and take the time to understand it. And I really am not trying to toot our own horn here. It's like, no, it's something valuable here. There's something valuable here, and the people who wrote this down understood it. And yeah, it's good words to live by, good words to influence your life. Think about how you can apply the lessons into your life. And this episode has been a crazy episode, but this just underscores it, right? It's the final thing that says that everything in here has been worthwhile, and hopefully you can get something from it.
For sure. And it's also, I really like the sort of this wish of good luck. Like, as the mythology around Havamal goes, Odin is the one who is giving us this knowledge. And then at the end, he says, be joyful. You've learned it. You're going to be going out and living it. Like good luck. Like, that's pretty good. It's almost like Odin actually cares that his wisdom gets used to make lives better. So yeah, no, it is a pretty joyful way to end the Havamal.
Oh, it's a good note. And with that, though, we are done the Havamal.
Who would have thought?
Took a while, that's for sure. We'll have to go count up how many hours we've spent on this, but it's been worth it. And just to recap this episode a little bit, though, this final chapter we read about the ultimate sacrifice Odin made to achieve the ultimate reward of the runes, the secrets, the key to writing, the key to language, communication, and the magic that goes along with that. And then we learned all these spells that Odin knows or learned for all these different useful situations. And maybe some of them are more applicable than others, but I think that's also the point. If you know all of these things and you at least kind of know what you would do in certain situations, like I think that certainly improves your life. And so maybe certain of these so-called spells would be more useful to you in certain situations, but keeping in the back of your mind what you would do in some other situation, right? So
For sure. No, having and knowing what to do in these situations. Again, if you've ever seen someone in a situation that knew what to do, like, it does seem magical, especially the more extreme situations, and they fly in action and get things done. And it is incredible. It might lack the pizzazz of like Harry Potter or hocus pocus magic stuff, but when you're in those situations and someone is able to take charge and navigate through them, I'd almost say there's something more meaningful than just something like the hocus pocus magic that, without really any effort of yours, just does what you want to do. Well, no, this person who's doing well in a situation, they've prepared for it. You're seeing the fruits of their labor. Like, that's something that's worthwhile.
definitely. So all of this taken together, it's a lot of how to succeed in the world and how to live. And maybe Odin goes about it in a roundabout way with all these spells, but I think the meta lesson is that you prepare for the situations that are going to be in front of you, and you make the sacrifices that you have to make to earn the reward. Don't sacrifice too much, because then you probably won't come out ahead. And strike that balance. Don't go too hard or fixate on one thing, but make those sacrifices, and you'll win the rewards. And maybe as a recap of the Havamal as a whole, like, Odin goes through all of this great wisdom, all of these great things that could improve your life. He goes through moderation, humility, don't drink too much, don't be too wise, only well, it's not good to be too wise, only moderately wise, everything like that. And then his adventures with love, some of his wisdom for Lodfafnir, again, some good, some maybe not so good. But this final section, quite something.
For sure. And I think that's why it's one of the most well-known parts of Norse mythology, because it's such an impactful and dramatic way of showing the need in life to sacrifice and to do what it takes to get what you want in life.
Exactly. It's how to live a good life, from the best understanding that the people writing these books, this poem, would have understood. And it's still valuable today, I think.
I agree. I mean, when these stories were being told orally, like, they didn't have a lot of space for frivolous things, right? It was sort of, you were either living and surviving or you were dying. There wasn't much in between, and so it's kind of a bare bones. This is, if you want to have a good, successful life, this is what you need to do.
And with that, this is let's close this episode off, because I don't think I could end it better.
No, I think it's a worthy ending to the Havamal.
It is. And just our usual things here. If you'd like to get a hold of us, if you enjoyed this episode, we are on Facebook and Twitter at Northern Myths. We're on Instagram and YouTube, Northern Myths Podcast. And we love if when people reach out to us and talk to us, comment. And we always appreciate a like, a review on iTunes or Facebook or any other platform you happen to be on. Subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't. We really appreciate that. Check it out. We got a lot of clips from the show. And we always appreciate if you share on social media. And it's a great way to help spread the word about the show and get to more listeners and viewers and all that. And just that's something we appreciate. And we're also on, we have a new web shop with some t-shirts and other little merchandise there. It's a great way to support the show, especially if you want to represent a little bit. And if you've enjoyed what you've heard, it's one way you can support us directly if you like. We also have a list of recommended books and a page of recommended music on our website, which is through the Amazon affiliate program. So if you go to purchase anything we recommend, we'll see a little bit of that. So another great way to support us if you'd like to do that. And the recommended books and music is all stuff that we personally have found influential in our journey here. It's the books that we cover on this show and books that have been influential to us, to our understanding of the world that we are bringing to the table here. And on the topic of books as well, again, we're reading the Poetic Edda, translated by Jackson Crawford. We are big fans of this translation. It's very readable, and you can follow along very easily, as you've probably heard here. Highly encourage you to pick up a copy because it's a fantastic translation of the Poetic Edda. If you want to follow along with us or read along, definitely a good version to have. Is there anything else, Dan?
Well, no, I think there's one more thing, and it's the most important thing, and it's to go find the myth that you're living.
This has been the Northern Myths Podcast. Thanks for listening.